Toni Bertolet grew up as the only girl between two brothers, in a home where she learned to be tough and self-reliant. She could blend in with the boys when she had to, but she also carried herself with the polish people expected from a Southern upbringing. That mix stayed with her as she got older, giving her a quiet confidence that showed up in every part of her life. After high school, Toni pushed herself into a demanding path. She went to college, then medical school, then specialized training. She kept her focus narrow and steady, building a career piece by piece until she became an ophthalmologist known for skill and patience. In the exam room, she treated people like they mattered. She listened, explained, and made frightened patients feel safe. Professionally, Toni had everything she had worked for. Privately, she still wanted a partner and a stable home life. She married young, but the relationship never fit. The divorce left her embarrassed and lonely, and for a while she buried herself in work to avoid thinking about what was missing. By the time she reached 30, she decided she did not want to live shut down forever. She started dating again, careful and guarded, and with a clear idea of what she wanted. Faith mattered to her, so she tried a Christian dating site, believing it could connect her with someone who shared her values. That was where she met Lynn Henthorn. Harold's profile presented him as confident and established, living in Colorado and working as a consultant tied to nonprofit work. He was attractive, charming, and quick, with the kind of attention that makes a person feel chosen. He described himself as a widower, saying his first wife, Lynn, had died in a car accident, and that he had waited a long time for a second chance at love. That story made him seem patient and sincere, like a man who knew loss and would not take a new marriage for granted. Their online conversations moved fast. Harold traveled to Jackson, Mississippi to meet Toni in person, and he made an immediate impression on the people around her. He was friendly, energetic, and seemed to know exactly how to win trust. Toni, more reserved by nature, looked calmer beside him, like she had finally found someone who could carry the social weight for both of them. By Valentine's Day of 2000, Harold proposed. The ring was impressive, the plan was romantic, and Toni said yes. Less than a year after they met, on September 30, 2000, they married in a large church wedding in Jackson, Mississippi. Soon after, they relocated to Colorado, where Harold said his work and connections were based. Toni rebuilt her professional life there quickly. She joined an ophthalmology practice and earned respect through long hours and careful work. At home, she tried to build a marriage that matched the image Harold showed to others. A devoted husband with a bright future, married to a successful doctor. In time, they had a daughter, Haley. Haley became the center of Toni's world. Toni kept her schedule full, balancing patience and parenting, while Harold presented himself as a working man with frequent business obligations. On the surface, their life looked settled, a family, a home, and stability. In 2011, an incident at their property shook the routine. While Toni was cleaning or working near the deck area, a heavy beam fell and struck her, causing serious injury. She survived, but the accident left bruising and lingering damage that took time to heal. It was treated as a terrible mishap, another random piece of bad luck that could happen during home repairs. A year later, Harold planned something that looked like a loving gesture. In September 2012, just 2 weeks before their anniversary, Harold contacted the office manager at Toni's ophthalmology practice. He asked for help arranging a surprise and said he wanted to take Toni to Rocky Mountain National Park for a weekend trip to celebrate their 12th wedding anniversary. The office manager cleared Toni's schedule for Friday, September 28. That afternoon, Harold arrived at Toni's office. Toni was brought into an exam room expecting a patient, but instead she found Harold waiting for her. He told her they were leaving immediately. He said childcare had been arranged for Haley. Her bag was already packed, and the weekend was planned. Toni trusted him and agreed. They drove into the mountains and spent the first night at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. They ate dinner, returned to their room, and prepared for a day outdoors. Harold had mapped out trails for them to explore. On September 29, 2012, their anniversary day, they entered Rocky Mountain National Park. They started a hike that began on the Deer Mountain Trail. Toni was not known as an avid hiker, and the terrain they moved into was rough and remote. During the afternoon, they went farther than many casual hikers would. Harold later described them taking photos and moving off the crowded trail, searching for a more secluded place. They reached a point where they ate lunch and spent time looking out over the landscape. Then they continued down away from the busier path, deeper into rocky ground. As the day faded toward evening, the trip turned into an emergency just before 6:00 p.m. Harold called 911 and claimed Toni had fallen off a cliff. His voice sounded frantic. He said she was badly hurt and needed immediate rescue. He pleaded for a helicopter, but the terrain and altitude made that impossible. Help would have to come by foot through difficult ground. A ranger trained as an EMT started toward the location, but reaching it took time. Harold stayed on the phone, then ended the call, saying he needed to conserve his battery. He called again later. A dispatcher tried to guide him through CPR steps. Again, Harold ended the call. At one point, he started a fire to make it easier for rescuers to spot him in the fading light. Another call came in, and he was urged to use a whistle so the ranger could locate him. He blew the whistle. By the time help arrived, more than 2 hours had passed since the first emergency call. Toni was dead. She had fallen roughly 130 feet down a steep, rocky slope into a place where the ground could break a body quickly and where survival depended on immediate aid and luck. A death inside a national park triggered a full investigation. Harold became the only living witness to the final moments. He explained that Toni had wanted to take photos of wildlife, including wild turkeys, and that she fell while trying to get closer for a picture. He presented it as a sudden accident, a simple slip in rugged country. Back in their community, grief spread quickly. People comforted Haley and surrounded Harold with sympathy. Toni's patients and co-workers mourned the loss of a doctor who had treated them with warmth and care. But not everyone accepted the story as clean and simple. Toni's friends remembered the beam incident from the year before when she nearly died. Now Toni was gone after another rare and extreme accident, alone with the same man. To the people who knew her, it felt like the kind of bad luck that should not happen twice to the same person, especially in such unusual ways. The doubts deepened when some who attended the funeral noticed Harold seemed detached and distracted, focused on trivial comforts instead of loss. It was not a single moment that turned suspicion into certainty. It was the pattern of small details, piling up until they formed a shape that was hard to ignore. The investigation widened and became intense. Harold's behavior during the emergency response was examined closely. At the scene, there was no clear sign of sustained CPR effort. The timeline of calls, hang-ups, and decisions began to matter as much as the fall itself. Then investigators uncovered something else. Harold's phone activity showed repeated presence in the area before Toni's death. Records indicated his phone had connected in that region multiple times in the weeks leading up to the trip, suggesting he had been there again and again, learning the terrain. 9 separate pings stood out as a set of deliberate visits, like someone practicing a route. A map was also found with a marked location, an X drawn where Toni fell. A detail like that turned a random accident into something that looked selected and planned. As the case grew, another call changed everything. Investigators learned Harold was not new to tragedy. His first wife had died years earlier under strange circumstances. Lynn Henthorn had married Harold in September 1982. They lived in Colorado, building a life that appeared stable from the outside. Then, on the night of May 6, 1995, they were driving along Highway 67 in a rural area near Sedalia, Colorado. After 9:00 p.m., drivers on the road saw a man in the street urgently waving for help. It was Harold. He told them his wife was trapped under their vehicle and needed immediate assistance. Harold described a tire problem and claimed that while they were dealing with it, a jack gave way and pinned Lynn underneath the Jeep. The people who stopped rushed to help lift the vehicle. Lynn's lips were blue. She was not breathing. She was lightly dressed for the cold night, wearing a tank top and jeans. The helpers piled coats on her to fight the cold and drove to find a phone to call for emergency help. Paramedics arrived and managed to restart Lynn's heart, and she was taken to a hospital. But despite that brief return, she died at age 37. On the scene that night, Harold's demeanor struck some as strange. He did not move with the urgency expected from a husband watching his wife die. He did not seem desperate for help to reach her. Instead, he appeared evasive, drifting away from those trying to gather information and slowing the process when every second mattered. An autopsy determined Lynn died from asphyxiation. Even so, within days, the case was ruled an accident and closed. For years, Lynn's death stayed filed away as a tragic mishap. No one pushed hard for answers because the story sounded plausible enough, and because Harold seemed like the kind of man bad luck could follow. But when Toni died in 2012, the older case resurfaced in a new light. Investigators looked back and found contradictions in Harold's accounts of Lynn's final moments. In some versions, Lynn had gone under the car for a lug nut. In others, it was a flashlight. Harold also gave shifting explanations about where they were going that night, sometimes saying they had not eaten yet, other times saying they were already headed home. Over the years, he had told people entirely different stories about Lynn's death, including claims that did not match the original account at all. When investigators pressed deeper, they found more cracks in the life Harold claimed to live. He had portrayed himself as a fundraiser and consultant who traveled for work. He described regular business trips as part of his job, but evidence of real employment was missing. There were no clear pay stubs, no consistent tax records showing steady work, and no proof of the professional identity he sold to others. Surveillance revealed that his so-called workdays often led to ordinary places, including long stretches spent on the internet at a local Panera Bread. The image of a successful consultant began to collapse into something far more fabricated. Money became part of the story as well. Investigators discovered Harold had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Toni. The combined value exceeded $4.5 million, and Toni did not know the policies existed. That detail turned her death into potential profit. As the pieces aligned, the anniversary trip no longer looked like romance, it looked like timing. On November 6, 2014, Harold Henthorn was arrested in Colorado after a federal grand jury indictment charged him with first-degree murder in Toni's death at Rocky Mountain National Park. He faced mandatory life in prison if convicted. At that point, Haley's world also shifted again. With her mother gone and her father jailed, the question of custody became urgent. Toni's family sought to bring Haley into their care, but legal barriers and Harold's refusal delayed the outcome. Haley stayed with godparents in Colorado while the case moved toward trial. In 2015, Harold went to trial for Toni's murder. There was no confession and no single piece of forensic evidence that captured the act itself. The jury heard about the secret life insurance policies, the repeated phone pings that placed Harold in the area before the anniversary trip, and the marked map that appeared to pinpoint the location of Toni's fall. The timeline of the 911 calls and the lack of clear life-saving action in those critical minutes added weight to the idea that Toni was not meant to survive. The similarities between Toni's death and Lynn's death were impossible to ignore. Two wives, two unusual accidents, two remote locations, two situations where Harold was the only witness, two outcomes that could funnel money and control toward the same person. After a 10-day trial and about 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Harold Henthorn was convicted of first-degree murder for Toni's death. He was sentenced to life in federal prison, where he would remain with no possibility of parole. Toni's family carried a grief that had been split into two parts: the loss itself and the knowledge that her final moments were not an accident. Lynn's case remained separate in the legal record, even as its shadow followed every major turn in Toni's case. The pattern was now visible, and the story of Harold's life no longer read as misfortune. It reads as selection, planning, and control. In December 2015, custody of Haley was granted to Toni's brother. Haley left the life Harold built and entered a new one. Shaped by relatives determined to keep her close to Toni's memory, Harold continued to challenge the conviction. Appeals were filed and rejected. He sought post-conviction relief, arguing ineffective assistance by his defense attorney, claiming his defense had not met constitutional standards. Courts reviewed the claims and denied relief, concluding the defense met the required standard for a fair trial. In September 2023, the Federal Appeals Court dismissed his post-conviction appeal, closing another door in the long process that followed Toni's death. By then, the story had settled into its final shape. A respected doctor from Mississippi, a mother devoted to her daughter, had trusted the man who positioned himself as her second chance. In the mountains of Colorado, on the day meant to celebrate their marriage, that trust ended at the edge of a cliff. Harold Henthorn remained in prison for the murder of Toni Henthorn, and the life he once claimed to live, built on charm and careful appearance, was reduced to the record of what he had done.